one of the things that I love to do is that I love to create images. It has always been soothing for me creatively. And one of the things that I have enjoyed so much in my work over the years is creating illustrations and creating tools, not so much for my students, I must admit, because in fact, the only way that I guide, or I am guided in the way in which I teach you, is literally through the images I use. I started an experiment last year at the Abyss event, and I will continue it, which is to be able to do this without images, to be able to literally create the images simply out of the descriptive capacity. These images are, for me, they're all formulas. And this one in particular, which is an image that I drew in 1989 when I wrote the first book, the Black Book. There is actually a section in the Black Book on juxtaposition, which the first people who ever looked at that manuscript, that was the part of it that they just sort of threw their hands up in the air and said, I don't know what this man is talking about. This is one of my oldest illustrations, and for me it's quite incredible. I look at it and I'm sort of, like a Locke's comment, not dizzy, but well, I get lost in it. Because all the information that one needs, sort of, to understand the very basis of the Maya existence as we understand it, whatever language one wants to use for that, is here. I mean, this is my visual equivalent to a five-dimensional formula, in the way in which Einstein's E equals mc squared is a four-dimensional formula for the realm of light. I mean, this is the way in which the construct works. This is the way in which everything is built. I mean, everything is built. And most fascinating about all of it is, the only thing I could call it is directionality. I mean, the arrows, looking at these arrows, looking at the way in which things are related to each other. One way to grasp this at a very, very simple level is to recognize that each and every one of us are one of these. Not only are each and every one of us one of these, but each and every one of us who are one of these have always been one of these. I mean, that's the thing that's so incredible. When you think about, the crystals of consciousness are very complex, they're very profound. I'm not really discussing design here for a moment, the design crystal. I'm talking about the personality because, of course, the personality is the continuum, it's the continuity, it's the base that never changes. From life to life, your design crystal is going to have a different configuration, will have a different base. You will not always have the same base. And you will see by, well, you won't see it in this class. It's something that, in fact, I cover in both PHS and Rave Psychology in the third year, which is the conditional anomalies. I love that. That is, if you have a certain personality base, you're going to be limited to certain potential design bases. In other words, you don't necessarily get all of them. There's all kinds of incredible configurations in the database. But I want you to look at this from two perspectives. I circle these and point to you, because we each carry one, and have always carried one, in order to understand that all of this does not come from the outside, but is programmed by our crystals. I mean, think about it, because it's something that you need to really grasp. You see, the itness of crystal consciousness on this planet, because I'm not just talking about humans. This is a vast crystal consciousness field. It is it that creates the all. At least it is it that creates what we call the all, because it is our limitation to perceive it in the way in which it is created out of us. See, humanity has always looked for a Godhead. I mean, it's a great puzzle, isn't it? You look at the sky and you wonder, humanity has always looked for the creative force. And a creative force that is responsible for the nature of being. Now, of course, there is no creative force as such. There is an ocean of data. Now, you might want to call that the creative source. But in fact, logically, you can see that is something that is simply caught in the continuity of endlessness. It is a byproduct of, the Big Bang that was a start that had a beginning before it. And in the consequence of the Big Bang, the emergence of the neutrino ocean, data. It is us, in this vast clustering, unique clustering of consciousness crystals, that we filter the ocean. It's us. It is life that creates the illusion of life. It's so wonderful to get it. It is all coming out of us. All of it. When you think about this graph, the first thing to think about is you're looking at 5 dimensions. Now, there are 5 dimensions only in the sense of the way in which they all work together. You can't really think of them as anything other than components of what we can understand through the totality. And yet, each one is an instrument of creating the illusion. Each one provides a unique filtering of the neutrino ocean that becomes a pillar of the establishment of the Maya. And that the Maya is what is emerging here. Here. It doesn't mean that all of us are deeply tuned to the Maya. It doesn't. We have different positions. Different positions. I think about my design. And I think about all the people that have for the sun, same line, same gate, same line, same color, same tone. What would it be like to meet that person who has that different base? What would it be like to be with all 5 of the possibilities? What would the result be of our communion as a penta? Everything is built on the penta. In essence, it's the other way around, in the sense that everything ultimately is designed to operate through the penta. And remember, here we're looking at this formula within the context of humanity, specifically. looking at it within this context. Not everything operates in pentas. That is, only humans and ultimately raves can actually come together in pentic auras. But the force of these 5, this is the bedrock of, it is the bedrock formula. Perhaps only the Chinese understood that, the ancient Chinese. From the same generations of the emergence of the I Ching was the 5 elemental construct. And there is a great validity, not so much in the, it's like all things when you see them in synthesis, I can see the value and the correctness of the 5 without necessarily embracing all of its illusions. But this 5 is everything. So today we're going to begin with, our examination of each of these particular bases. And we're going to start here. The dimension is movement. Movement. This is the great instrument of everything in a sense. It is movement that leads to evolution. It is movement that leads to being. It is movement that leads to design. Now, movement doesn't lead to evolution directly. You can see that. It influences the design and it influences the being. And they directly influence evolution and vice versa. You can begin your journey as a juxtaposition alchemist by just digesting and pondering and meditating on what does it mean, these connections. Think about it as people. Think about your connection if you're a movement base and you're trying to connect with an evolution base person. Think about that. You can see right away that you're not going to be very successful doing that directly. I mean, the most fascinating thing about understanding base is to recognize that these are the positioners and orientors. This is all about orientation. It is all about the position you take. The relationship between this base and this base, or this and this, is very different. As is its contribution to the Maya. And of course it makes an extraordinary contribution. Individuality. The great law of physics. That everything is moving. And that no 2 objects can occupy the same place at the same time. And this is the essential truth of the teaching of human design, that each human being has a right to differentiate and be unique. We are already, in that sense, given the right to uniqueness through our specific geometry. It is there. But we are not simply uniqueness. You can see the trap of any formula. This plus this plus this plus this equals that, You cannot separate them. You cannot. And so the individuality has to come into contact with and deal with the other corners of the square. And of course the beginnings of the construct of what it will mean to be influenced synthesized into a maya. We're all we're all dumped into this maya that we made ourselves. I rather like that. Let's look at a couple of things here before we get any deeper into this. We have a dimension that we call movement. It's deeply influential when you combine it in juxtaposition theory with relativity, because of course it forms the foundation ultimately of, in a sense, what we would call time. Movement is something that is such an essential ingredient to the very nature of being. It's why it is the first base. In the beginning is movement. The Big Bang is nothing but a great rush forward at speeds that are mind-boggling. And it has been moving ever since. Everything is rooted in movement. Everything is rooted in movement. Out of movement comes evolution. Out of evolution comes being. Out of being comes design. And then emerges the illusion of space, the Maya itself. You can also see that there are fascinating associations that are here. Basic components. The relationship of the reactive to the magnetic monopole. Now the magnetic monopole is the basis of everything. The magnetic monopole is the answer to the deepest questions that are left in physics. The monopole is the counterbalance of and the coordinator of movement. I guess it's what makes it so extraordinary. You see, think about the beginning. The Big Bang is an explosion. It's an explosion. It's an explosion that is probably the equivalent of, a zillion, gazillion atomic bombs. You know what I mean? It's one of these kinds of explosions that is absolutely impossible to imagine. The heat of that explosion is so impossible to imagine. And the speed of its movement. And of course, that movement is a movement that moves out in every direction. There is a certain imbalance to it, like with all explosions. That is, there is more density in certain places than in others, but generally speaking, this is just a huge blowout. No, the monopole is really something amazing, isn't it? It is a monopole. It only attracts. It is the counterbalance to the shattering. And in that counterbalance, here lies the value of reactive, or its source. The opportunity in that to realign how things are organized. To realign how things are organized. The shattering is a jigsaw puzzle that can never be put back together again. It can't. It is the beginning of creativity. Movement is creation. It's creation. Here lies the great creation force. And there are those of you that carry this base. and understand something about the basis that we carry. That the base that is universal, eternal, the one I talk about, in which the personality base is always the same, incarnation after incarnation. This is only related specifically to what is the Sun Earth, or the profile. All the other activations you have, they all have bases. These are receptors. They're receptors. So each and every one of us, there are exceptions obviously, but just about every one of us carries within us a reincarnative specific focus, our positioning, our contribution to maintaining the totality, which as a unique being we experience, in a sense, as 70% of our programming. And the rest of it is receptors to base frequency, receptors to the other aspects. See, it's an incredible mechanism. How deeply integrated we are. And at the same time, how deeply responsible we are for all of it. For all of it. So movement is creation. Movement is also energy. It's energy. The movement is the embodiment of the force of the explosion. And what we get out of this, in the poetry of this description, these lines were written like the illustration, 1989. It was my first writing down of these themes. As a matter of fact, these actual descriptions here were actually written in March of 1988, is when they were originally written down. And the monopole and the seeing, our line of trajectory, our line of geometry, being held together in illusion of separateness, and that illusion of separateness is determined by comparative seeing, that everything about the nature of creation is literally pointed towards, through movement comes comparison. Comparison. The movement creates, I'm here and you're there. And of course the movement in that sense is so that we can, what did they first call them? Moving pictures. To be able to travel through a visual development. And of course, there has to be something to see. As you move down these formulas, what you're really doing is you're moving from the unique source, which is, the basic theme of the base, and you're moving to the illusion of it all. In other words, it is a progression of moving out of this aspect into what its contribution is to the whole in that sense. And of course what that leads us to is it leads us to landscape and environment. Now if you're a PHS student, you know right away the themes here, environment, landscape, seeing, that all of this is about the nodes. And deeply, deeply related to the nodes. And the relationship of the magnetic monopole to the nodes is a very, very powerful one. The nodes are about trajectory. It is a line of movement. It is a line of movement that the monopole is responsible for, that is processed in that sense through the nodes and the information of the nodes. And in PHS, when we are looking at the external determination, External determination is rooted in concepts of correct environments and landscapes. And all of this is about seeing. And by the way, on Monday, I'm releasing a series for Jovian Radio that'll run for about 6 weeks, and it's something I did in radio I was doing about 3 years ago, and it's a look at all 32 nodal polarities. If you get a chance to listen to them, there'll be one every day. It's a great journey. The nodes are really deeply special. But you can see here that somebody who is carrying the reactive base, their positioning is going to be very, very aligned to their environment, their landscape, to the visual nature of their lives. Their nodes are going to end up being very important to examine. In other words, there are values that are here, not about the way the being is going to deal with them. I mean, that's the most interesting thing. That is, after all, the nature of what it is to be a human being and the way in which the program intended us to emerge in that sense is all conditioned by what happens at the tonal level. The tone establishes the architecture. There is a real line between base and tone, and it's an obvious one that you can see in the mathematics of substructure. 6 lines, 6 colors, 6 tones, 5 bases. Now I will show you later in this semester how the bases and the tones align to each other. But it is not a comfortable piece of business. In other words, this is not about base being responsible for the nature of the being in that sense. For example, this is not somebody who's necessarily going to need to run around all the time just because they happen to carry the movement base. It will depend on the cognition. It'll depend on the tone. It'll depend on the motivation in the color or in the determination. And it will certainly be determined by what the line is going to be. In other words, it's going to have a filtering system going all the way up until it finally gets to its gate expression. And again, it's not about being able to see this in a directly personal context. However, there are aspects within the design that can be enriched from the personal perspective by beginning to grasp the nature of one's personality base. After all, it's our continuity. It's the closest we come to, an opportunity somehow to communicate with the essence of ourselves. I mean, that's what our base is, at least in terms of the personality. It's our essence. It is our cosmic purpose. It is our transcendent purpose. It is, it is the foundation of our, our consciousness, our personality consciousness existence, and it is a continuity that is never broken. I mean, it's never broken. The base remains the same. The reactive is also something else. You can catch it sort of in the word itself. The re and the act. This is a binary. And the binary is so deeply captured in the glyph itself. This glyph, for me, is the potential emergence of the whole binary nature, the whole dualistic nature of being. And it's rooted here in this movement. That this movement leads to the movement in comparison, and there is this tension that exists that is rooted here in the binary. When I want to take you back for a moment. this theme, this uniqueness, I define. First of all, the eyes. Do you notice all the eyes? I mean, the eyes are interesting. I mean, the eye can only emerge in the body graph. There is no other way. And the eye can only emerge out of the ego. And we see the dimensionality of the emergence of ego through design. This I, this is rooted here in the first base. And of course, this is not really the I. It is I and you. I mean, I and you, or I and it, or I and the other. It's not it is a joke in that it is not alone, if you know what I mean. That is, it's always in the context of another. It is always in the context of comparison. It is always in the context of defining. Uniqueness needs to be defined. It's sort of another joke on, imprinting in human design, that your uniqueness is expressed through your definition. And one's uniqueness is inherent in one's movement. But whether or not that individuality can actually be expressed is not rooted in the potential that is there in that dimension. It cannot. That potential can only exist in the holistic illusion that emerges that we call human. And in that, it is a component amongst other components. But it's the source. And I love the triangles meeting each other in the hourglass. It is a graphic allusion to time and relativity. Every human being is a pillar of the universe. This is what these things are. And what's interesting is that they align us. We know that in the language, in the keynotes of base, that we're talking about orientation and position. Here's the position. The orientations are what are interesting. And these are orientations that, again, we can take to the human level. That is, that there is going to be a natural orientation that is going to work in those directions only. Only. And that you can see that if you follow this line of direction, that the meeting between this base and this base is one of friction. No. This one is correct. It's one of friction. I mean, think about that. If you bring this here, these two together, then you can see what the theme is here. The theme, these themes are not easy to read, by the way. And when this friction is a very obvious thing, but it is not to be construed as a negative thing. Everything is moving and everything is rubbing against each other. This is how everything is informed in the totality. Things are always bumping into each other. Things are always rubbing against each other. I mean, nothing human beings like better than the friction of rubbing against each other and creating heat. And friction creates chemical reactions. You know, we're looking at the combination of the body and the movement, you know, the individuality, the uniqueness, and the body becoming one. I mean, here you see a cornerstone of how the individuality, you know, has a deep relationship. The uniqueness has a deep relationship to genetics. Here is their connection. The uniqueness through this connection, through this movement, that this is where we establish within the ultimate vehicle. You know, we establish the basis upon which uniqueness can be expressed. And it is expressed through the genetics. And the uniqueness is maintained by the uniqueness of the movement. So there is an interesting relationship that one can intuit between what it is to be over here as a reactive and what this relationship to this base, what it lays as a foundation, not just simply for this relationship, but again, think about what it is doing in the sense of the world. You know, if for example you didn't have this, let's say that movement wasn't uniqueness, let's say movement was sameness, we wouldn't have any expression of uniqueness in genetics. We would have a clone. We would have the same thing remaking itself as the same thing. A dead end for evolution. And movement, as you can see, individuality cannot directly affect evolution. It's the body in its relationship to evolution. It is the design in its relationship to evolution. And of course that you can see that evolution is about the transformation not simply of humanity, what we talk about in terms of biological evolution, but the evolutionary movement of civilization, the evolutionary transformation of civilization, and of course the evolution of the personality. Here is where we catch a glimpse of, what I call this time of Eden, where it is possible, to break through the homogenized personality construct and get to the source of the passenger and awakeness and awareness. There is personality evolution. There is evolution in the Maya. There is this possibility. But these are tracks. They're tracks. They're lines to follow. If we go in the other direction, the relationship between individuality and ego. There are certain prayers in certain Middle Eastern faiths, Judaism, Islam, where one of the prayers is, thank God I was born a man, which I thought was horrendously sexist. I would like to amend that prayer and thank myself and the rest of you for helping in all that, for being born with an ego, defined ego. I don't think there's anything more misunderstood than what ego is. what an extraordinary power it is. How misunderstood it is, because we have a world in which 2/3 of humanity have an undefined ego and do not in any way express what is the nature of the ego. They express what in fact is its perversity, which is, can be very, very sad to see this lack of self-worth and this need to prove and the submission of oneself to the demands and authorities of others in order to try to impress. All of the horrors that come with an open ego. And here you see it at its dimensional source, and I don't want to confuse you into assuming that this is all about the heart center, but it is about understanding that at the very basis of building existence, one of the corners of that is ego. It's ego. It is not simply individuality that is maintained through a genetically changing vehicle. No, that's one side. It is individuality that is expressed through unique will, or individuality expressed through, as it's stated here, kind of coyly, I design. We create the Maya. We make it up. Solomon was a bright, bright man. Vanity, 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 he said. Everything is vanity. Well, it's true. The Maya, which is not self, is the vainest of all things. If I had delusions of grandeur and I were a god, I would crush it in my hand. But that's the not self. Design. When we hear the word design, we understand that this is the way in which mechanisms are organized. And the whole basis of this organization, the root of this organization, is ego. It's all built around the heart. And of course, any kid in grade 3 would go, duh, If our heart stops, we die, It is it's a very special force. And what is interesting here is that we're not dealing with a directional medium that we call friction, but we're dealing with a directional medium that we call earth. And it's something about this, that this is about the grounding of this whole process. The grounding of it. In other words, bringing it out into a world, literally. It's where we get this, it all began with clay. God was bored one day and decided to doodle and made some clay dolls and went woof woof. Actually, considering where we're going, have you ever thought about the relationship of the surface of this planet to the planet itself? Scale is something that is often useful. If you think about the earth itself and the area on the surface of the earth, that place from, the roots of plants up to the tallest of trees, and you compare that to the earth, it is such a thin, well, it's almost not there, quite frankly. I mean, it's like spaceships going up and taking pictures of Earth, and very quickly any evidence of our existence disappears. We are the Earth. I mean, like the fungus that grows on our skin that has these microscopic little creatures wandering around. We are the fungus and the little creatures on the skin of the Earth. And it all grows out of it. I mean, in the larger sense here, what you're looking at is diversity of individuality. And diversity of individuality expressed in one way or another through ego. In the way in which every species has its own voice to shout to the sky that it exists, has its own expressions of superiority and dominance, has its own determination to be different in its own way, within its own group. There is this uniqueness permeating the earth, a vast, vast diversity. And you get in the sweep of this vast diversity of self-expressing uniqueness in form genetically made viable. You have three parts of the story. And we carry it. We carry it. It is us that controls the expansion and diversity of life on this planet. Now let me ask you a question. We are now living in one of the greatest eras of extinction. It is comparable to major extinctions that took place hundreds of millions of years ago, 65 million years ago, one that took place 14 million years ago. There's a vast extinction of species taking place. And it's all taking place in the way in which these two bases right now are being programmed. And everyone who is carrying these bases, the movement and the design, that it is they, think about it, it's they that are bringing an end to certain species. It's true of not just us, of course. The vast diversity of the planet is conditioned by how those two bases are programmed. It's not coming from the outside. It isn't. It is the way it is filtered by us. It's only when it's filtered by us that it emerges. It's all about us. See, this is the magic of getting to this place. You get to this place at the end of what is the final round for the evolution of humanity. And we get to this place where we are in the last cycle, in the last line, where we are here to witness the deepest potential occult knowledge and inner truth, because it is in the global program. We're here in this place to grasp what is fulfillment for us, truth for us. That it is all rooted in the expression of our uniqueness. That it is all about our ability to be able to operate uniquely in the homogenized Maya. And it is there that we get to fulfill what is in fact our true purpose, which is to be a new kind of filter for the program. It's all about us. Every day, every person that enters into the experiment of operating correctly is themselves. The frequency that goes through the base, this is a frequency that becomes part of the construct. Maybe there's a tipping point. One never knows about time and destiny. But it is us. There is no one else that is responsible. There is no great Godhead that's responsible. In the end, we're where the buck stops because we're the last place of filtering. It doesn't matter whether Mars is filtering it, or Jupiter is filtering it, or the Earth is filtering it, or the crystal bundles are filtering it. In the end, it goes through our base. And if our frequency is correct, then we are truly capable of fulfilling what is the potential of the four corners of this. The evolution. The ability to totally transform. And all of that, obviously, it is only when you get the fourth ingredient that you automatically get the fifth. That you get the emergence of the Maya itself, the illusion itself, the consciousness of the totality. This is where the whole has a personality. We cannot distinguish it. We are the trees in the forest. But it is there. And that you can see that somebody who is going to carry this base is going to be an integrative field, integrating all the others, the corners. Oh, there's so many formulas in here to see. So many different relationships in here. You can go in many different directions, You can do it in triangles. You will find that very interesting. You can do it as we have been going along in the single lines as they go around. You can look at simply the straight lines going through. And each one is a very specific formula. And they all add up to the construct, the basis upon which we have existence, the basis upon which we program the Maya through our eternal function. We have our position. We establish our orientation. And we contribute to the establishment of, this space. And suddenly out of that emerges us. Us. Present. Thinking. In the illusion. A body, an ego, a mind, an individual. The perfection of it. See, bases, they're they're the only sacred element that we have in our design is our personality base. It is evidence of our contribution to the totality. It is us as instrument of the totality. I don't Well, human beings have a very, very hard time enjoying being. It's tough. And transcendent concepts are not necessarily satisfying. It doesn't make them necessarily feel worthy. It doesn't, strangely enough, get them to see that they are unique in what that means. They cannot separate themselves from the domain of comparison. They can't. They can't. They don't know how. They've never been freed. We are here to transform not simply ourselves, but in recognizing who we are in our uniqueness, that is an essential ingredient for everything. For everything. I enjoy making my daily contribution to the illusion. I like being an aspect of the whole and aware of it. Anyway, I go adrift on my base mysticism. Do ponder this. It deserves pondering. And next time we'll move along, move up the ladder, see what we can discover. Okay, folks, you have yourself an entertaining day, and do make a nice contribution to the world today. Just be correct. Okay, bye for now. Good night to all of you that are up late, by the way. And for the rest of you, enjoy your day.